the reason I picked this topic and the reason this is so meaningful to me is because it's actually a breakthrough or a realization that I had before I met the one for me, right? Before I met my wife, I was, now it's funny because I come from a spiritual tradition, right? I'm a Muslim, and it was Ramadan a few years back. It must have been 2017, maybe, right? And it was Ramadan. I'd been fasting all day, and it was nighttime, and there are special prayers we do at night. And in the middle of the night, I was on my knees, and I was actually in the full prostrating position with my forehead on the ground. And I was just like, I'd been dating and I'd been speaking to people and nothing was clicking. And I couldn't decide, like I was, I've spoken to a few people. I couldn't figure out what criteria I meant to be using. I was just in a bit of a confused state. And in that moment, I just realized, like, why am I trying to do this myself? Let's let the divine play a role here, right? Let's let the divine take over. I'm like, look, there are too many people on planet Earth for me to be able to figure out who the one is for me. I can't date 4 billion people and then figure out which one's the optimal one for me. And I also come from a spiritual tradition where I know that God is all knowing and all loving and is the only one who really knows, out of the 7 billion people walking around on Earth, out of the 4 billion women walking around on Earth, which one of them is actually the optimal spouse for me. And it just kind of clicked. And in that moment, I did a really deep, heartfelt prayer. And I decided, it was the beginning of Ramadan, I decided I would do this every single night during Ramadan, right? And for some reason, it's like the idea, the kind of romantic idea that there's one person out there for you, with the very practical realization that, well, hang on, there probably is on planet Earth one person who's the optimal one for you, but a human being can't figure that out. But the divine absolutely knows it, right? I was like, oh, well, why don't I just ask for that? And I'd also realized that, my whole life, or not my whole life, my whole single life, I've been praying to be married, to find someone really attractive that I'm really into. But it never occurred to me to just ask for the one who only God knows is the optimal spouse. And I was like, oh, of course. So I went ahead and did it. I made that prayer every night during that Ramadan. And the angst and anxiety around my singleness kind of faded away, because all of a sudden it was like, well, now I just need to show up. Right now, I just need to show up, and anyone who's not the one will be repelled, and the one won't be. It kind of took the pressure off, of trying to impress people and stuff like that. And it's kind of funny because I'll tell you a quick story, right? I'll tell you a quick story about my love life while I was single. At one point, I started talking with this kind of spiritually inclined Sufi girl who I knew from way back in the day. And I kind of reconnected with her, and I was like, oh, it could be her. Right. We started talking, and we went out a few times, and at one point during dinner, like I was now starting to think I actually made one of the mistakes here, which is to, as you're asking God for the one, to put a face and a name to it. Right? Because as soon as you start dating someone, you're like, oh, it's that one. Okay, God, I want to be with the one, preferably the one I'm seeing right now, right? So I started making that mistake. So what happened is we went out on a completely normal date. We went to a little this place called Patisserie Valerie, right? Afterwards, and we were having cake and a cup of tea. It was all very sophisticated. I was wearing a nice shirt, everything. I was like, oh, this is going swell, and it's kind of funny. At one point, have you ever had the thing where you're eating a bit of cake, and so there may be little crumbs of the cake, and then you try slurping tea? Well, I did that as she said something funny.
Oh, no.
And I started laughing and somehow inhaled some soggy cake with the tea, and I started coughing and actually spat out tea everywhere. And then started coughing my way through, and then I tried to play it cool, right? And I was like, and she was like, are you okay? Do you need to like sort your, go to the back? Like, no, I'm good. So what were you saying about your parents? And it was just a complete disaster. And I would say now a divinely ordained disaster, right? Because she obviously wasn't the one. And I couldn't have told that at the time, because when you like someone, you just always think that the person you like is the one, right?
Right.
And that kind of brings me, so the first, like, the way is to just make a very clear intention that there is one person on planet Earth who's optimal for you. You don't know who it is. You'll never figure it out. But just making that intention kind of changes the game a little bit, because now you're not, it brings us on to number 2, which is detachment. You're no longer attached to any one particular person. You're attached to, it's kind of like, I want to marry whoever the divine decides is the optimal person for me to marry, and no one else.
Mm-hmm.
So you automatically, it's almost like a divine hand will be at play, repelling people left, right, and center from you. And you don't need to take it personally anymore, right?
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, you don't need to take it. It's like, oh, well, okay, I guess you weren't the one. By the way, a key way to know if they're the one, they think you are too, right? Very obvious when you think about it, but the person who's not the one won't be like pushing you away, right?
Right.
Soon after that incident, I got a very direct, actually mature, direct text after I, texted her a couple of times, hey, you want to meet up again? She was just like, it's not going to work out between us. And I was like, okay, no problem. And it wasn't like a hard thing anymore. It was smooth. So the first thing is the optimal spouse prayer. The second thing is being detached from the outcome with any particular person, which falls into place really naturally if you really are making the intention that you want the one and no one else, right? You might go on a couple of roller coasters before you meet the one, but that's great. And I'll give you a little nugget here, is that after you do meet the one, and I think a little bit later I'll tell you how you know if they're the one, right? But if you do meet one and you realize it, you've got this wonderful thing, which is that for the whole of the rest of your relationship, you don't have to have a wondering eye of like comparing, is the one I'm with, but there's all these other people out there, right? That kind of goes away, because you know that you made a really sincere meditation and prayer to be with the one, and you're with someone who is now the one. And it kind of like, there's something that happens, at least for a guy. I don't know if this is true for women, but for me, certainly, it was kind of like the idea that I even need to think twice about any other woman is just gone. Because I prayed for the one and I'm with the one, and now it's done, right? As long as Rashid is alive, I'm set, right?
Right.
Now, along the way, because here's the thing, unlike the movie The Secret, you don't make a prayer for the one and then the first person you meet is the one. It doesn't quite work that way. You're still going to be talking to a few people, because there's probably, my belief here is that there are things you need to learn along the way before you're actually ready for the one. And so you get a few trial runs first. God, in its divine wisdom, gives us a few trial runs to make sure we don't mess it up royally when we meet the one, right? And those trial runs are just other people who have some of the character traits and some of the things that you will ultimately want in the one, but they're not the one, right? Like the Sufi, the young Sufi lady I was into, she wasn't the one, but she certainly had some inner qualities that I really respected, and that ultimately I later found in Rashida, but in a much more perfected form, in a way that was more perfect for me,